What if the brain injury that left you with seizures, brain fog, and a fear of the future became a catalyst for a PhD in brain science and a whole new approach to recovery? I'm Kiley Como, legal nurse consultant here at Shane Smith Law, and this is Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions, where we explore traumatic brain injury from every angle: medical, legal, lived experience. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Brody Miller, PhD, brain rehabilitation and neuroplasticity specialist who helps high-achieving professionals, athletes, and concussion survivors eliminate brain fog, memory loss, and lingering symptoms without pills or surgery. He's a best-selling author with a PhD in traumatic brain injury research, and his work blends really cutting-edge science with his own recovery from severe brain injury, seizures, and even brain surgery, proving one core truth, that the brain can heal. In this episode, we're going to walk through his story from trauma to transformation and what he's learned about how change is possible even when hope feels out of reach. Dr. Brody, it's really good to have you with us today.
Awesome. I'm really grateful to be here.
Yeah, we are too. We're excited about the conversation. Audience, there's a lot to learn from Dr. Brody, so we're going to have two episodes here, so tune into that second. So right now, we're gonna kind of, Dr. Brody, we're going to break it down and learn about your story and kind of build a foundation, okay? So for our listeners who are meeting you for the first time here, can you kind of share a little bit about, your background, who you are now, maybe the kind of work you do with people recovering from brain injury?
Yeah, I would love to. So everything brain related is my passion. I got out of this, as you mentioned, from brain injury and seizures, and it ultimately became the catalyst for what the work that I do today. And it's all about helping concussion and brain injury survivors find a medium, find hope, and find a science-backed approach to their recovery, to where there's actually some guidance and they don't need to learn to live with it. Mm-hmm. And so I primarily help athletes and high-level professionals who have experienced a brain injury or concussion get back on track so that they can live their life's purpose and they can live with direction and turn a setback into a comeback.
I love that. And, that's a big thing on this show is, a lot of our audience, are survivors or loved ones of survivors, people that work with brain injury survivors like myself and the staff here. So we appreciate having guests like you and who can really help us to build that community, build awareness, inspire, which is exactly what we're hoping to do today. You're really open about the work that grew out of, like you said earlier, your own experience. Can you kind of take us back to that incident where you were assaulted, it sounds like, and knocked unconscious, and then kind of what life looked like in those days, weeks, months that followed?
Yeah, sure thing. Authenticity. Everybody deserves authenticity, and we don't have to tell everybody every little small detail about our life, but at least give people a framework of where I was and what actually happened. So at that time, I was a youngster, early 20s, and I was making a lot of bad decisions in my life. I had a few concussions playing high school football, and some other just crazy incidents that had happened. And ultimately, drinking led me to that night where I was at my hometown, Asheville, North Carolina. And there was a bar called Scully's. And my friends and I decided to go out and have a night on the town in this club. And one thing led to another. I had too much to drink that night. And I ended up, for some reason, getting an altercation with a bouncer inside the nightclub. Oh, and eventually it kind of spilled out into the street, and it was a messy situation. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I think it was like liquid courage was going through me. And the guy was about 6'5", no exaggeration, like 270 pounds, and ended up getting hit with a haymaker from him right in the middle of the street. And I was knocked out, laid out there. And for months, I had no idea what was going on, brain fog, memory loss, impulsiveness was skyrocketing. And to make things worse, it was an insult to injury moment because somebody ended up recording the video and it went online to a local news TV station, and over 100,000 people ended up seeing it. But it went absolutely viral, and the cops got involved. I didn't my family decided not to go after the prosecution, but the law had their own interpretation of it. And to make a long story short, it was just such a severe TBI that I ended up developing a brain bleed a couple years later. And they knew that because I had my first grand mal seizure, and I was about 6 months into my alcohol rehabilitation journey. And I had one in the middle of the day, and I'll never forget it. It was kind of like my walls were all closing in. And if anybody who's ever experienced a panic attack, they know that same feeling. It's like your walls are kind of caving in upon you. And they rushed me to the hospital. I had seizures en route, and they discovered this brain bleed when they did an MRI, which is about the size of a cranberry. And knowing how the brain functions, it does not like blood. Immediately, I was having grand mal seizures. The logic said to my family and myself, let's have brain surgery to remove it. And I was encouraged. Unfortunately, it did not stop the seizures. On top of that, the seizure medications I was taking, like big horse pills, they had these horrific side effects. Keppra, Depakote, Vimpat, this antipsychotics, and my brain was just fried. I kid you not, I had such a severe reaction to Keppra that I ended up in a mental institution.
Really?
For a night. Luckily, that's what led to me discovering how the brain can heal, because I was taking these seizure meds and they didn't stop the intensity or frequency of my seizures. And I said, well, why would I be taking something with these crazy side effects that aren't stopping? And so ultimately it led me to discover the science of how the brain can heal. And that gave me hope in a time where I felt desperate and hopeless. Man. It gave me hope, and it gave me a way to understand that my brain could rewire, it could heal. And ultimately, God willing, I'm seizure free today. I'm over 2 years of no grand mal seizures, and it's the longest streak I have. And it just talks about the resilience of the brain and what I wrote in my best-selling book, Brain Rescue. I think anybody, whether you're a brain injury survivor, concussion survivor, ADHD, OCD, whatever might be going on, it can apply to you. Even if you just want to get back to cognitive performance and get this supercomputer better than ever before, it's going to work for you.
Wow. Yeah, you paint that picture so well. I could picture it in my mind's eye, from the incident itself to the aftercare. You're having worked in the neurosurgical ICU myself as an RN. I have seen that play out in firsthand, and it is an ugly process, and it's very difficult to get through. You talk about the seizures; those are just so all-consuming, and yeah, gosh, you painted that picture so well. The medications, love that you mentioned those, and just you mentioned that last part, that I think you said broken and helpless or hopeless. Just in that period, because you really have nothing else to do but to wait for these things to see. Well, you feel like just wait for them to go away, but you said it just wasn't happening. What can you talk a little bit more about those symptoms? Really would like for you to continue on that, those frustrating symptoms you were dealing with. I think that really helps our audience to really understand.
Yeah, absolutely. To paint that picture, my memory is really bad. It was like I didn't know where my keys were. I didn't know where my wallet was. And on top of that, my identity was just broken into pieces. The shame and the guilt that I experienced in my recovery was enormous weight. And on top of that, I felt like a failure, because it was like now my family was investing their time, their energy, and resources into my recovery, doing like hyperbaric chamber treatments. We eventually got this. I saw a functional neurologist. And so during that time, I was like, ironically, you think that like you're worthless and you're not worth it to focus on your recovery. But to be honest, the best thing I could have done at that time for my family and myself was to focus on my recovery.
Yes.
Instead of getting in my own way and feeling bad about myself, The other experiences was like severe brain fog, a lack of mental clarity. But honestly, one of the worst things was the impulse control. And I really felt like a child in a man's body because I couldn't stop myself from saying things. I couldn't stop myself. My addiction skyrocketed, and I ended up, it was just a rough time because I would say things to people, or I would do things and I would regret it. And I was like, why did I do that? Come to find out, it was because there was damage to my frontal lobe. It wasn't like a character thing. It was more of it was a cognitive thing and a brain health thing. And if you know that, then you know that you can improve and you can recover.
Yes. Yeah, the brain can heal. There was a physiological reason behind the things you were seeing, but the brain being a lot of these injuries are invisible, right? Invisible type injuries, the brain fog, the mood changes. Some of them are more outward, like the impulsivity, the things you say and do, or the seizures. And I'd like to pose a question to our audience. For those of you that have walked a similar journey to Dr. Brody, or maybe you're a family or loved one of a survivor of TBI, what has been the hardest part of watching your loved one or yourself struggle with these types of invisible symptoms, or maybe some of these outward symptoms? Please leave your experiences, your comments in the comments section below. Dr. Brody, again, you're so eloquent with how you're painting that picture. At what point did you realize that you just can't sit around and wait? You can't wait for the meds to do their thing. You can't wait for somebody to decide how you're going to get better. You needed to actively retrain your brain, right? Was there a moment or a turning point that really shifted your mindset from just surviving to really digging in, and as it sounds like you've done, studying and just really getting into that experimental mindset and seeing what's possible?
What an awesome question. And I got goosebumps when you said that, because after the fact that I knew that the brain could rewire itself and it could change, it could heal, and it could reorganize itself, it was a tough pill to swallow, because it was like all of a sudden accountability to myself became what was necessary to move forward. And so I realized that all of those things that led to that fight with the bouncer was my own doing and my own decisions. And it wasn't to shame myself, but it was to realize that everything in my life had led up to that point. But if I was able to change my thinking and my behaviors and my emotional state, then my life could start to change.
Yeah. You talk about accountability, accepting responsibility. I think, in your specific instance, you had some to do with how you got in that position, but I think even more broadly speaking, the accountability and responsibility you have for your own recovery. We hear it so often from successful, we'll call them brain injury survivors. It's those that really lean into the notion that, okay, I've got this challenge in front of me and it's going to be up to me ultimately to get through this. And so again, I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to digging more into that with you. You talk about in some of your bio and some of the information you got out there being that, I think you call it a 7-year dropout senior, going from that to this, now you're a PhD, and you're focused on traumatic brain injury research, mindfulness, meditation. How did you get so deep into this science of, again, that neuroplasticity, brain healing, the way, that changed the way you thought about your own recovery or the recovery of others? There
was a particular study that changed my life, and it talked about, it was a Harvard study that talked about how meditation can change the physical structure of the brain in 56 days. And I began to meditate diligently, like every day, every night. And to the listeners who may not fully grasp what I'm saying is that the brain first changes at a chemical level. So it's kind of like two people on a cell phone communicating to one another. But over time, these brain cells will actually grow physically. And why that's empowering is the brain is a lot like a muscle, and it's a use it or lose it organ, and that it can actually grow. So long story short, once again, is meditation led to some major breakthroughs in my brain and how it was healing. And the connectivity got back and sharper than ever before. And so that led to me getting back into school, transferring my accreditations from my bachelor's. And I just quickly, I was putting in a lot of work. We're talking about 14 to 16 hour days during COVID to like speed through as fast as I could get through schooling, and eventually got my PhD in 2025. And it was a lot. There was like learning how the brain learns, how it rewires itself, getting into speed reading and increasing my processing speed. A lot of people know who Jim Quick is, and he helped me do that. It just was like my brain became sharper than it ever was before, and I was able to accomplish things faster than ever before. And just really using consistency and repetition just to get through all my classworks and my PhD studies, my dissertation, all of that as fast as I could. And yeah, I was just amazed because it all started with how I thought about myself and how I looked myself in the mirror. And that started to change really quickly. And there's a lot more self-respect and confidence and focus and concentration there.
Those are huge fruits of everything you just talked about, unsung, if you will, that self-respect and just appreciating where you've been, where you've come from, and what you've achieved. Again, we talked about at the beginning of the show, we're looking for inspiring stories, and this certainly is just that. You discussed building new neural pathways, meditation being something you found useful to do that. We've had, neurologists and other providers on the program, interviewing them. And, we've talked about similar things, just new experiences in general, eating new foods, seeing new things, listening to new sounds, music, all help to rebuild neural pathways. And we're talking about neuroplasticity. So I would love for you, being the expert, to talk to our audience, many of whom, again, are survivors or family members. How would you explain that neuroplasticity in simple kind of real word terms? What is it? Why is it so important?
I'm so passionate about this because that word in itself was what changed my entire life. And what neuroplasticity is our brain and nervous system's ability to reorganize itself, rewire, to change, to heal, to learn, and to adapt over time in response to all of our experiences, our thinking, our emotions, our behaviors, our habits. Everything, every little tiny thing starts to change the brain. And there's brain plasticity and neuroplasticity, to be clear, that our brain reorganizes itself, but also does our nervous system, our organs like our heart. There's neuroplasticity there as well. And so for the listeners, I want you to understand that this simple word, really think about this word, think about what it means. Before it was called neuroplasticity, it was called learning, right? So like it was, people said, oh, he learned. Well, he or she learned. Well, they changed. It's the science of learning and it's the science of change. And if you just understand the basic understandings of how the brain works and learns, then your entire life can change at this moment in time. If you really embody that and you start to apply it every single day, changes won't happen overnight, I promise you. But if you're patient and you're consistent, the turtle won the race. It wasn't the hare. And so you can build momentum, I promise you.
Yeah, amen. I love that. It used to be called learning. So true, right? We seem to have made it more complicated, but that is purposeful because the brain is such a complex organ. It's not just when you learn, you got this new memory, you remember a thing. I mean, there are chemical changes. You talked about that, physical changes in the brain when we learn. So yes, it is very much more than just simply learning a new thing. I'd like to ask our audience, when you hear the word neuroplasticity, maybe you've never heard it before. What comes to mind? What questions come up for you about how much your brain or your loved one's brain might be able to actually change? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Dr. Brody, before we get into, your specific methods, what do you see as maybe the biggest myths, and there's a lot of misconceptions out there about people that have brain injury and how they recover, especially, we're talking timelines, permanence, or, what's possible.
Again, I get goosebumps talking about these subjects because one of the biggest misconceptions I ever found was that you need to learn to live with it, or this is a permanent injury and you need to learn to live with it. And why this is such a misconception is there's study after study disproving that. Number one, I've been blown away by this recently as I discovered there's children that have what's called a hemispherectomy, which means that half of your brain was removed, and they do that to stop seizures. But what they find out is these young children, even with half a brain, are able to live somewhat normal, disclaimer, normal and healthy, full adult lives. Now, what in the world? If you took half somebody's brain and it rewired itself and it adapted, keyword adapt, right? Keyword adapted to that, then who's to say that somebody who got in a car accident or had a stroke or, something severe can't also rewire their brain over time as well?
Yeah, those studies, those stories are just so startling to read that could happen. Definitely seen lobectomies. You're right, and even in the adult years, again, that brain can start to heal and rewire. Yeah, there is that caveat, and yes, things will be different.
Yes,
that new normal, but it doesn't have to be abnormal. It's just new. It's just different, right? So I really appreciate you keying in on that. I know we're getting close to time for this particular episode, so we're going to be back for the second, but I really would like to kind of pick your brain and leave our listeners with, I want you to talk to those folks that are, kind of in those early days, maybe, things are dark, a lot of uncertainty. Maybe they're dealing with those grand mal seizures. They can't put, two thoughts together and make sense of things. They feel like maybe they feel like they're over. What's the first thing you'd want them to hear from you right now?
First thing I would want to tell them is there is light at the end of the tunnel, and you're in a dark, dark time right now. And I remember it was no fun. I mean, there was self-hate, there was deep depression, all of that. But I'm telling you that don't ever, 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 never, ever give up hope in a better future, because hope is the very essence and the very seed of what's going to get you to recover. And if you lose hope that things will never get better, I'm sorry, it's going to be rougher for you. So you can turn a setback into a comeback, and it starts with hope.
Amen. Yes, hope. I love that word. And I think, for our listeners, I think you portray it well. It's not the kind of hope that's like, I hope this happened. It's a hope that you can expect change if you believe, if you really apply yourself to the work, if you work hard. I mean, you don't know what the future holds, but there is a path. So, Dr. Brody, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate everybody's attention. That's going to wrap it for today's episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. A huge thank you to Dr. Brody Miller again for sharing, his personal side of his journey. And, we talked about severe brain injury, seizure, brain surgery, and on to becoming a best-selling author and a brain rehab specialist, helping others to reclaim their lives without relying solely on pills and procedures. His story is super powerful, and it really underscores his core message that the brain can heal. If this conversation resonated with you today, sounds like your story maybe, or maybe it's a client or a patient story, we would love to hear from you in the comments. Again, your questions, your experiences help us to shape future episodes that truly serve survivors, families, and professionals. Please give us a like, subscribe to the podcast, and then share it with someone who needs to know that there is hope after brain injury. And remember, if you're in pain, call Shane at 980-999-9999. Join us next time as we're going to dig into Dr. Brody's practical rebound method and his 90-day brain rescue approach. Talk to you next time.
In pain, so I call Shane. 980-999-9999. In pain, call Shane.